Welcome to the Military Justice Today podcast with your host, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams, covering the full range of military law topics from all branches of the armed forces. Today's episode is made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. And now, let's welcome the hosts of the show, Rob and Mickey.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in today. We are back with the Military Justice Today podcast, 2023 style. Welcome to the gentlemen that are in the room with me today. We've got Robert Capovilla, Mickey Williams, and we also got Sean Flood today. So welcome, Sean.
Morning.
You've been on the show before, but not all that much, so it's great to have you back. We've got a phenomenal topic today. Letters of reprimand, GOMORs. I guess they're known by other things and other branches, but we're going to cover that in great detail today. But we've got a pre-show question for our gentlemen. Mm-hmm. And I know it's early in the morning. You're probably not ready for that yet, huh, Mick?
I actually forgot we do this. So, no, I'm not ready. You caught me flat-footed.
I'm glad it's that.
What are you talking about? Mickey's been squatting since 5 o'clock in the morning. He did 300 squats by 7 a.m.
Also true.
I told him he looked a little more jacked today than he did at our last episode.
Well, Sean's here. I'm trying to impress him.
Yeah.
I don't believe he did 300.
For those of you who don't know, Sean is probably the most physically fit guy in our office. That may upset Mickey, but Sean looks like a bodybuilder, and he takes lots of supplements, and he gets up every day very early and trains, and it's very impressive. For those that don't know, you could probably check us out on the website and see that Sean's got quite the physique.
It should be noted that I'm not in the office regularly, so when you say in the office, you're obviously excluding me.
We can see that if Matt were in the office, Matt would be the most physically fit out of all of us.
All right, so here's our question for today, gentlemen. And I'm going to start with Robert Capovilla. What is humanity's most positive trait?
That's a ridiculous question to ask me. What is humanity's most positive trait?
I don't know
if you
what
could
that means.
only give humanity one trait, respect, compassion, loyalty, what would it be?
Like the Army values?
Is that the Army values? I don't know.
I would say that faith and belief in Jesus Christ is humanity's number one trait.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that's pretty profound. I wasn't
no question
expecting
about
that one.
No question about that.
I wasn't expecting that. I like the religious take on it, though.
Yeah, well, for those guys, for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a devout Christian.
That's true. That's very true. All right, Mick, what about you?
I would say, because that took a lot of courage for Robert to say, I would say courage is the trait. And I think it was Churchill, might have been him, who said that courage is the most valuable characteristic, trait, whatever it might be, because without courage, you can't do any of the other things like have duty, loyalty, respect, honor, integrity.
Never in the history of mankind have so many owed so much to so few. The Battle of Great Britain, one of the great moments in the history of freedom for the Western world.
A great quote. I was praying he got it right. I'm not sure if he did or not. 'Cause
I don't know.
I'm not a history buff, but
that took courage too.
I like those first two answers. Sean, what about you? What do you think?
For humanity, so obviously humanity is naturally evil. I have that philosophy. But I would say the most positive aspect would be empathy and compassion. The ability to be sympathetic towards others and to bring them up and to be there for one another in spite of everything.
It's a good answer. It's hard to argue with that one, I think.
Okay,
that's a good answer.
Matthew's turn it back on you.
I think respect, honestly. I think discipline is probably a very close second for me, as I think a lot of great things can happen when there's discipline involved. But I think respect, if you respect people, that probably eliminates a lot of things. Racism, war, adultery. If you respect people, you're probably missing a lot of those other things that I think we struggle with on a day-to-day basis.
So what Matt is saying, if I'm hearing him correctly, is that we got to call the room to attention when he enters to show him the proper respect. I'll start doing that.
And my third would be getting jacked, lifting a lot. And heavy, too, not light.
I'm glad
heavy.
you said that.
So, all right. Well, we're going to have to come up with a better question next time. I usually fail in that capacity, but we're moving on to our topic of the day, which is letters of reprimand. I think it's GOMOR in the Army. You guys will have to correct my terminology as always. Before we get too deep into this, though, I want to put a bit of a disclaimer out there. Obviously, this isn't designed to be legal advice for a specific case. If you've got one of these issues going on, please talk with a qualified lawyer about your specific case and what you should and shouldn't be doing. But let's talk about letters of reprimand, GOMORs, and I'm going to leave it up to you guys as to where we start. Who wants to kind of define it, talk about what it is, and get us going on the general path, and then we'll drill down to the specifics.
Yeah, so I'll be happy to do that. GOMORs are something that Mickey and Sean and myself have worked for a long, long time, both as active duty Army officers in the JAG Corps and certainly now in our civilian capacity. So GOMOR stands for General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. And what that means in Army lingo, in Army terminology, is that the general officer of the installation, the division, the unit where you are stationed, the unit you belong to, has decided, based on an investigation, based on allegations made, that you deserve to be reprimanded in writing. And literally that's what it is. It is a written reprimand provided to the service member that says you've been a very bad boy or girl for any number of different reasons. And that service member, that soldier, is given a copy of the letter of reprimand, the GOMOR, and at that point in time, they typically are given 7 days to respond, where they can provide either, a complete defense or evidence and mitigation. The big part about a GOMOR is not just that you're being reprimanded by typically your commanding general, but the impacts that it can have on your career moving forward.
All right, well, let me just jump in. I do think we're going to spend a good amount of time on that, but let me ask a couple preliminary questions on the process itself. Do GOMORs usually come as a surprise to a service member, or do they know that something's going on? Do they know that an investigation is happening, or do one day all of a sudden they get this letter and they're completely taken by surprise?
My experience has been is they don't even know what a GOMOR is most of the time, the first time they get it. They're like, what is this? And so then they have to go talk to the assigned counsel on post, or they give somebody else a call, like us a call. And there are officers generally know what it is, but enlisted folks, because they don't deal, we didn't deal with the upper echelons of what goes on with the paperwork and everything. So no, typically I don't think most know what a GOMOR is until they've received it. When they are facing allegations, though, and they talk to a lawyer ahead of time, usually the lawyer will tell them, hey, this is on the table, and then that sparks the conversation about it.
Okay. All right, and then what types of things, I do want to come back, Rob, obviously, to the impacts on the career, because that's probably at the forefront.
Yeah, can be very significant. Yeah, we can talk about that later.
For most of our listeners, I think that may be the most important part of this next 35 minutes. But does somebody want to talk about what are the most common misconduct or actions that would trigger a GOMOR or some kind of letter of reprimand?
The very most common is DUI. I think it's like automatic. I think is that right, Sean? It's like
it's technically not automatic, but generally when you get a DUI, absent your civilian consequences, and if it happened on post, absent your federal consequences with that, is generally you're going to be given one, or at least you're going to be absolutely considered for that automatically.
And we've asked Sean to be here today because Sean runs, for lack of a better term, the administrative section of our office. Sean responds to GOMORs and 15-6 investigations, as well as doing court-martial work for us. We also have Josh Conklin at the office, who works with Sean on a daily basis. Josh is a phenomenal attorney, and Josh handles a lot of our admin actions as well, including GOMORs. Sean, I'm going to take Matt's role here for a second and ask you, I would agree with Mickey back in the day that DUIs were the most common reason to have a GOMOR, but based on the last couple years, it seems like the majority of GOMORs that we've worked, that you've worked, that Josh has worked, has been for sexual harassment. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, we still get DUIs all the time, and that's generally what you used to see. But now what we're seeing is we have attorneys that are savvy enough that when you have the right representation, that they know they're going to lose at court-martial, or that you're going to demand trial by court-martial at an Article 15 or something like that. So what they'll do is they'll give the general officer memorandum of reprimand or the letter of reprimand, knowing that there's not a whole lot that you can do about it except put a really, really strong rebuttal out there. And we can talk about that later. But yeah, I've seen a lot of it as the result of a sexual harassment investigation. I have seen them for full-on forcible rape and forcible sodomy because the statute of limitations had expired, because on some of those offenses, it's only 5 years. And what we're seeing a lot now is a lot of people claiming PTSD so they can get VA benefits, and they'll make accusations from 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think the major one we had was about a 13-year-old allegation. There's no evidence to support it. Our client had a full alibi in this particular case, but CID, we got an accusation of sex assault. The trial counsel or the military justice advisor doesn't know what the implications of what they're doing is, and they'll title the guy. And now you have this titled individual, this titled soldier, who, what are you going to do with this? Well, let's give him a GOMOR. And you really have to fight really, really, really hard against that, because there are no rules of evidence associated with that. There's not even with the Army specifically, there is no standard of proof in AR 600-37, which is the Army regulation that covers unfavorable information.
All right. Well, if I can jump in just for a second here, because I want to make sure we hit the different types and the things that could trigger it. And I thought it was interesting what you said about the timing of these issues. But we talked about DUI, sexual harassment, even sexual assault, rape, forcible sodomy. Are there any others that are more common that you
drugs?
see?
Drugs that go in there too. But
toxic command climate is what we see a lot.
There we go.
Any type of anything, and what they really want you to focus on in 600-37 is anything that indicates substandard leadership ability, lack of promotion potential, morals, lack of morals as an officer or as an NCO or even a junior soldier, and integrity. So when you get these, a lot of times NCOs and a lot of time leaders be like, oh, that's an integrity violation. And it's just, it's extrapolated information that's taken out of context a lot of the time.
Is this thing kind of a catch-all in some cases?
It is. So, GOMORs can cover just about anything. What Sean is talking about is a little bit more unique to what we've seen the last few years. It was very uncommon back when we were active duty soldiers to see a GOMOR for a sexual assault allegation. That was not something we saw very frequently. We've seen several over the last couple years. But yeah, by and large, look, a GOMOR can cover everything from a DUI to toxic command climate. It can be junior enlisted. It can be senior officers. It can cover the gamut of any offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, including what Sean talked about, those offenses that deal with essentially a violation of the Army core values. So yeah, we've seen it for adultery, DUI, drugs, sexual assault, rape, all sorts of things. I would say, what I've seen the most the last couple years is sexual harassment, based upon both the president's emphasis on, further codifying sexual harassment, and also with the Vanessa Guillen, the Vanessa Guillen murder, and then the subsequent allegations of sexual harassment. The Army and the military in general right now are under the impression that anytime a soldier feels uncomfortable with sexual harassment, and they feel an obligation to do something. And a lot of times that results in a general officer memorandum of reprimand.
I got a quick question for you, Sean, about that. So I know that they changed one of the rules with GOMORs that has to do with sex somehow, that no matter what, it's going to get filed permanently. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, that's put in the, I believe it's in Chapter 3. There's information in there. In 600-37, it discusses...
And we haven't talked about the filing and what that means and everything, but don't they remove some due process because there's some sort of attachment to sex? Am I right about that, or am I wrong about that?
That's correct, that it will be filed if it is substantiated. There's no discretion to locally file it.
I see.
So
that's probably why we're seeing more of those too then, because they know there's no way the soldier can fight back.
Well, the soldier can fight back. They can argue that it's not substantiated, right, Sean? It's not an automatic, hey, there's a sexual harassment allegation that's going in your permanent file. Those soldiers still have the right to say, I didn't do this. This should not have been substantiated by, let's say in this case, a 15-6 IO or something like that. But if it is substantiated, the commanding general has no discretion to say local or not, which traditionally speaking even if an allegation of sexual harassment was substantiated, the CG could say, I got it, understood, we're still filing it in the local file for the soldier so the soldier can move on and promote and go back to their career. Whereas if that is filed in the permanent file, for lack of a better term, that career for that soldier is essentially going to be over.
Yeah, I think so. It might be a good transition point to talk about the 3 different filing determinations when you receive a GOMOR, is that you have a right to provide a rebuttal. And we'll get into the rebuttal phase later, but you can either have the whole thing rescinded. And as you know, most of the time we're shooting to get the whole thing rescinded, especially if it's a sex assault allegation or something that we know is not true. So sometimes we'll get GOMORs based on police reports. And police reports are drafted by police officers several days after the fact, and they leave out facts and important pieces of information, and they haven't interviewed everybody. So, hey, you get arrested. Oh, you get accused of domestic violence, and you spend a night in jail. Well, anybody can accuse anybody of domestic violence. There's got to be facts that back that up. So they just go straight off a police report. So you go to get that whole thing rescinded, and that's one of the options. One of the things is that can be placed in the local file, which is your local unit file. Once you change general court-martial convening authorities, that's no longer with you anymore. So if it's an interpost transfer, like from my personal experience, I was assigned to the 101st, but then I went over to 5th Special Forces Group, which is a different general court-martial convening authority. So that would get that local file. That file would be removed at that particular point. And then the permanent file, which in the Army is the Army Military Human Resources Record, the AMHR, and that will be permanently filed. And then you have steps after that to appeal with this thing called the Department of the Army Suitability Evaluation Board, the DASEB, to get it removed from there. But those are the 3 determinations that you can have for a GOMOR.
So it sounds like there's different places where this, I'm going to call it a negative mark or black mark, can be put on a service member's record. What implications does that have for their career? And maybe the answer to that is obvious to most people that serve. But if you get one of these and it's filed in either your local or your permanent record, what are the implications for you? It's
a big difference between officers and enlisted, to be perfectly honest. They can initiate separation for any misconduct, GOMOR or not. So let's say you get they don't choose not to
with
do
somebody
GOMOR.
Who's enlisted
and officer.
Okay.
They can initiate just on that allegation of misconduct. Now, they have a different burden of proof at the administrative separation action, which is preponderance of the evidence. The GOMOR doesn't really have a standard of proof. It just needs to meet certain standards of accuracy, relevance, timeliness, and completeness. But there is no hard preponderance of the evidence. And the government at these boards will argue, well, it's administrative, so administrative is bound by preponderance of the evidence standard.
Okay, so you could be separated.
But that's not true. That's not in AR 600-37. So, yes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You could be separated. What other?
Yeah, so if you're talking about, just to keep it relatively basic, if you have a GOMOR, okay, and you either hire an attorney to handle that for you, or you're going to go and try to get some help online or help on post from like legal assistance or something. Okay. Number one, it can be rescinded altogether, which Sean has been very successful the past few years in getting GOMORs rescinded. And basically that means you submit a legal defense and the commanding general looks at it and goes, you know what? I don't believe that this soldier did anything wrong. That happens. Number two, in the GOMOR response, you can also request that it be filed locally, which was what Sean was talking about. When it's filed locally, right? Essentially, I think it stays in your local file for no more than 2 years, or when you PCS, essentially.
Change general court-martial convening authorities.
Change general court-martial convening authorities. And what that means is that it's not going to impact your promotion, right? The GOMOR itself will not impact your promotion. You may have been, there may be some other things that happen, like a referred NCOER or something, but bottom line is it's destroyed. It should not have a major impact on your career moving forward. The third thing that can happen is it's filed permanently in your AMHR, which means that the promotion boards will take a look at that and it will be there. And that will flag you with the promotion boards and will essentially end any opportunity or hope you have of getting promoted. And that's why there's such a big deal. Can you imagine being an officer of, 16 years or an NCO of 16 years, you get a GOMOR for something and then all of a sudden that's it. You're done. Your retirement is in jeopardy. And that's why folks hire us oftentimes to handle these matters for them, because otherwise they're going to be stuck going on post to a legal assistance officer who may have only been a JAG for 6 months. I mean, that's the first place the Army places JAG officers is legal assistance. And a lot of times their advice is, no matter what, fall on your sword. Fall on your sword. Take responsibility for your actions. And there are times where we advise the same thing. There are times where we say, no, this needs to be investigated again. We need to talk to the witnesses. We need to find out what really happened here, because we don't think our client committed the underlying misconduct.
Yeah, and let's not forget, too, these GOMORs have implications down the road, too. So if you fall on your sword and essentially admit everything, and then it goes to a trial, now all those statements that you made could come back to bite you.
I haven't seen... Have you ever seen that, though, Mickey? I've never been in a court-martial where they use a GOMOR, or where there was a GOMOR used against... I've never seen that in a court-martial.
Not the GOMOR, but the response to the GOMOR.
Right. I've never seen that in a... Usually they don't...
And you know why? Because they usually plead out. Because now they've got a statement from the guy saying that he did all these things, and he just did it for, he lost sight of his response, a lack of judgment or something like that. So
yeah, but typically they're not going forward with a court martial when they do a GOMOR. The only time I've seen that is when another act or allegation occurs and they want a court martial for that, and then they throw whatever prior allegations there were on top of the current allegation on the charge sheet.
I've seen it for drugs.
I've seen it with internal communications, so spousal communications for a sex assault case. They gave him a GOMOR based on saying that the spousal communications were, conduct of becoming an officer, gave him a GOMOR for that, and then move forward with court-martial charges after that, and then...
Oh, I know which case you're talking about. Okay. Yeah, that's right. That was at Fort Campbell.
Wouldn't you have an argument, though, to suppress those statements because he wasn't read his rights at any point prior to providing?
Well, he provided a rebuttal.
Yeah, it's not. He's not being asked questions,
and so he admitted to everything.
But the fact that he's being asked to respond, shouldn't there be a warning in there that says any and all statement? I mean, his Article 31 Bravo rights.
He did it upon advice of an officer. So what happened in that particular case is we were arguing, hey, this thing was done in contemplation of sentencing. They did it to say, hey, this GOMOR's in his AMHER and we can bring it up on sentencing. And so we said, hey, they can't do this because it's the only reason this was done. They fully moved to go forward with court-martial charges, and then they filed this GOMOR so they could say, hey, he even has a GOMOR in his file. I think the judge was going to litigate in our favor, but when we got the word from the panel that the client got a full acquittal, so...
Oh, very nice. So, I mean, bottom line...
Not relevant.
Bottom line is, to Mickey's point, what you say in your GOMOR response can be used against you down the road. So if you're going to fall on your sword and take the advice of legal assistance, understand that those statements will be used against you. I've not seen that at a court-martial. Where I have seen it many, many, many times is separation boards.
Sure.
Right?
Well, that's typically where you would see it.
And that's something that we've got to talk about, right? Typically speaking, when there's an allegation of misconduct and the Army decides to go the administrative route, there's going to be a combination of an Article 15, a GOMOR, and then usually a follow-up separation board, right? And everything you say in that GOMOR can be used against you at the administrative separation board. And we've seen that. I mean, I don't know if it's hundreds of times, but certainly dozens of times. I just had a separation board out in Utah, Salt Lake City, with an officer where his rebuttal statement was, obviously entered into evidence, and it was helpful for us. But
now you're locked into it.
You're locked into it.
You can't change. If you divert from that at all,
right?
Now they're questioning your integrity.
And if you're going to fall on your sword, so be it. If that's the right thing to do, that's the right thing to do. Sometimes that's all you can do. But understand the chances of losing your separation board, which is almost certainly to follow, becomes far less likely if you've admitted everything in a GOMOR rebuttal.
So to build on that, I brought it up earlier. Officers enlisted are a little bit different. For officers, if you have adverse information in your AMHER, the mere fact that you have a GOMOR in your file, doesn't matter if it's true or not. The fact that there's derogatory information in your file serves as a basis for separation. Now, what they'll do is they'll say the derogatory information, which will form its own ground, and then the underlying misconduct will form its own ground because it's moral professional dereliction, something along those lines. And so what we see is we get these really crappy GOMORs, right? Because we have unlimited authority to give GOMORs out. And so we provide a really, really strong rebuttal, and then we go to the board, right? And let's say the GOMOR gets permanently filed. And we go to the board and we're like, hey, this is all the evidence. These are all the facts. This is what we argued. And we provide a consistent argument all the way through. Yeah, you know what's going to happen is the fact that there's a GOMOR in his file will be ratified by the board. They'll say, hey, yes, there is a GOMOR in his file. Does it warrant separation? And the answer is going to be no. And then the underlying misconduct, once you argue in front of an impartial board with a preponderance of the evidence standard of proof, they'll come back and say unsubstantiated.
Yep.
And so that officer survives their board at that particular point.
And that's a very, very key point for folks to understand, and for also the JAG officers listening to this podcast to understand. I had recently a board where the trial counsel argued to the panel, right? Or excuse me, argued to the board members that they had to separate because the GOMOR was already filed permanently by the convening authority. And I said, that's absolutely incorrect law. The trial counsel, I guess the recorder, right? The recorder is giving the board wrong law with me right there, and I'm objecting. The legal advisor comes back and says, well, no, the GOMOR can serve as a basis for separation. Well, yes, of course, but they still have to prove the underlying allegations from the GOMOR by a preponderance of the evidence. They can't just say he was given a GOMOR, therefore you have to separate. What's the purpose of having a board to begin with? So that's something that I've seen them try. And in that case, I think it was just a recorder who was relatively inexperienced. But I had to literally, I took a break. I called Sean. I had Sean and Josh draft up some legal instructions for me. I had to go back to the legal advisor, who was an 05, by the way, and say, hey, here's all the sources. They cannot make this argument. 45 minutes later, the legal officer changed his opinion and agreed, and then gave an instruction to the panel or to the board members saying, hey, you have to basically substantiate by preponderance of the evidence the underlying allegations of the GOMOR itself. Because sometimes they'll argue at those boards, the GOMOR by itself, right? The fact that it's there is enough to separate. And that's just not what the law says. Otherwise, why do we even have boards to begin with? Right. I hope that all made sense, but we've seen that a few times this past year, and it's something to be mindful of. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about a soldier is notified of a GOMOR, Sean. How many days do they have to respond? And second, what rights do they have once they're notified that the GOMOR is being initiated?
So each branch is a little different. So that Air Force is about 3 days, and the Army is about 7. They'll give you 7 days. Now, the key to look on that is sometimes they'll draft and say 7 calendar days. Sometimes they'll say 7 business days.
Right.
And, don't look and actually see what the document says. But yeah, generally 7 days. Now, let's say they give you a GOMOR on like the 23rd of December. Well, nobody's really working. Nobody's going to be around. Nobody's going to be able to answer questions. So you can ask for an extension, a reasonable amount of extension. You just need a good reason why. And
they typically grant those extensions.
Yeah, they grant them, but they like to do that too. Like right before a 4-day weekend, they'll give you the GOMOR, or right before some sort of holiday. Right, they'll do that because they're just trying to move actions.
And so you have the right to, at that point, provide a rebuttal. And so a lot of times with these investigations, they're one-sided. And I always tell people the underlying investigation is only good as an underlying investigating officer.
Before we get into that, Sean, let me ask you this. Okay, so 7 days to respond. This is something we get a lot. Mm-hmm. Does the soldier have a right to see the evidence against him, or is that right somewhat limited by the regulation in place?
Anything that's serving as the basis of the GOMOR must be provided to the respondent. That is unambiguous in 600-37.
But I've run into this personally several times, where there'll be an entire CID investigation, and the only evidence they turn over to our client is the accuser's statement. Let's say this is a sexual harassment or sexual assault case. The only evidence they'll turn over is her statement. And then we'll be like, well, we're entitled to the entire investigation, and they'll say no, because the only thing they gave the convening authority was the accuser's statement and a summary of the investigation.
Which is a good point to make in the rebuttal.
Yes, actually. 100%. Yeah. Does that happen?
It certainly does happen. So anything that forms the basis has to be provided. And they're saying only that one particular document. Yeah, but then here's the issue with that. And this is where I think you have there's a lot of really great judge advocates out there. But with the new judge advocates, they don't realize the second and third order effects of what they're doing. They don't give us all the information. We do a FOIA request. We get a full copy of the investigation. We go to the DASEB and we say, we didn't get all the information. And that is a specific basis for appeal, that we weren't given any of the information. They did not follow their procedures.
Because we've had cases, GOMORs, sexual assault, sexual harassment type stuff, where we knew there was exculpatory evidence in the investigation and the Army still fought us as to whether or not that should be turned over. And I kind of want to shift now and talk about that's what we can do as a firm, right? If we're hired on for a GOMOR and the Army's going to play, games about discovery, we're not going to give you the full file. You're just going to get the basis, which is her statement. We have the ability to go out. We conduct our own investigations, right? We talk to our own witnesses, and we're able to get a lot of relief that way for our clients. I can think of one case in particular, Sean, that you and I worked together. It was a case with a sergeant out of Fort Bragg. It was a rape case. It was a straight up rape case. We found out through our own investigation that there were 2 other people in the room when this sexual assault allegedly occurred, right? CID either refused to speak to those 2 people or refused to turn over their statements. Sean, you went out, you got the statements, you got the affidavits. We provided it to the command, and thank God the command did the right thing, because those affidavits said we were in the room the whole night. A sexual assault never happened, period. Had that soldier not had the right representation, his career would have been done.
Yes, 100%. And we did put a little pressure saying, hey, we're going to go to 82nd higher headquarters on this. But
yeah, if I remember correctly, I may have sent an email personally to a 3-star general in that case.
Speaking of second and third order effects, like Sean said, now that judge advocate has lost all credibility with that command, right? I mean, that's just poor lawyership right there.
It's when you have exculpatory information, it's I don't know. I just don't get it, to be perfectly honest.
I think what we've seen more the last few years than perhaps ever before is a failure to see the big picture. If I'm a judge advocate and I'm talking to my SJA who's advising the convening authority, and I know there's exculpatory evidence out there, I feel like that would be my moral obligation to provide that to the convening authority. And it's disappointing at how often that does not happen. And I don't know where that comes from. That's not what I was taught as an Army judge advocate. We were always taught to, be ethical, to have a high moral ground about different things like this. But we've seen it more than once this year where they don't want to turn over the full investigation, and they don't provide the convening authority with exculpatory evidence. They just provide them with the evidence that makes the client look bad. And that's fundamentally not right.
100%.
I can see Matt over there. He feels left out. I took over his job for a minute. He's fuming.
I don't mind that at all.
He's fuming. You guys should see him the whole time off air. He's throwing up his hands. He's pointing to papers at me.
I was taking some notes and actively listening. What haven't we covered on the topic?
I don't know, Matt. What as a guy who as a guy who's not served and who is not a military attorney, what have you heard that you would have questions about if you were a mom or dad or somebody listening to this podcast?
Well, I think what I'd like is a simpler explanation of how to defend against one of these. Like, what are the steps that a defense attorney would take to fight one of these in the simple format?
Yeah.
Like, here are the 3 or 4 things that a good lawyer would do to fight this. I've heard the word rebuttal. We've heard a number of good examples about what's been done in the past, and even I think some very helpful information about how this stuff is politicized and some wrong decision making by command. But what are the 3 or 4 things that a good defense lawyer does to defend one?
So I'll let Sean cover that first, and then Mick and I can chime in as well.
So if you work with me, I have this philosophy of it's not about winning and losing; it's about not losing. So a lot of times these do start off as a 15-6 investigation or a CID investigation, things along those lines. And if you're an officer or if the sexual harassment investigation, you get a right of rebuttal before that. So if we know there's going to be an investigation, we know there's a CID investigation, we try to get it as far in front of that as possible. So we have witness interviews done. So we have the good soldier book done, all of that stuff done. So then we are just addressing the GOMOR allegation itself. So if we are not successful with the appeal on the 15-6 investigation...
Hold on a second, though.
Sure.
When you say rebuttal, or when you say, you're putting information together, is this written information that you're putting together and then submitting?
Correct. So we'll put together a written response package saying, hey, the elements are not satisfied for this particular reason. They didn't interview this particular witness, or we'll make procedural and factual arguments. So that's that initial 15-6 CID phase, 15-6 sexual harassment phase, where we think that there's an investigation. When it comes to the GOMOR itself, we're dealing with very specific allegations. So you, and the one that comes to my head right now is extramarital sexual conduct, or adultery, which used to be known as. You, engage in an inappropriate relationship with a person not your wife, and it was to the prejudicial good or indiscipline, and like, you are hereby reprimanded. We go back and we say, hey, this is, and that is when we have those 7 days to provide that response. So with that good soldier book, we're saying, hey, this guy's a good soldier. He's a good guy. He wouldn't do something like that. And we have character letters, and we have his military record, all stuff that is extremely relevant to the filing determination of rescission, local file, or permanent file. Part of that, and sometimes what we'll do is we'll do the personal statement of the individual saying, hey, this is what really was going on, this is what was happening. And then, if the case warrants it, if the investigation or whatever underlying facts are so bad, what I'll do is I'll do a separate rebuttal as a legal rebuttal. And so the command is looking at it from, hey, this is my personal story of what I was going through and what happened. And then we go from the legal standpoint, because they can be mad at me as much as they want. I have a little more leverage to argue and go against them.
So, I mean, you can tell Sean's got a big brain, and he thinks about this stuff an awful lot. To keep it 1, 2, 3, 4. Number one, we will conduct our own investigation if necessary. We do not like to rely on CID or a 15-6 officer who doesn't understand legal standards. Number two, you will get an attorney like Sean, like Josh, like myself or Mickey, that will attack the substance of the allegations, right? Submit a legal defense, help you draft your own response, and really do what we can to undermine the allegations that are being made.
And this is written. That portion
it's written.
Is written.
Now, there's also, correct, no
point.
hearing. There's also a lot that goes on behind the scenes. We will call the legal, we'll call the brigade legal or whoever's handling the action and try to talk to them about, hey, listen, can a deal be struck here, essentially? Does this have to be a GOMOR? Can we talk about what's out there, what's missing, the evidence? There's a lot of that goes on behind the scenes as well. And then what Sean referenced with the good soldier book and character statements, the paralegal assigned to your case, for us, it's likely going to be Yolanda. We'll go out there and interview all the witnesses that you think are going to have nice things to say about you. Get those statements, put together your I Love Me book, package it up into a really strong work product that will include a legal rebuttal, potentially the client statement, any other interviews or affidavits we collect, and then, of course, the good soldier book. And that sends a message to legal. Number one, the hope is to win the upfront action, get that GOMOR rescinded. But if that doesn't happen, that also sends a message to legal that this is going to be a really, really tough case to win at a board, and sometimes can provide relief in the long run. We're also building a record for the Board of Corrections, which Sean handles some of those actions as well. And you're going to want to have as quality a work product as you can. If you lose that GOMOR, it goes in your permanent file. You file later to the Army Board of Corrections to get it removed. You better make sure you've produced a good product, because what we see a lot is people will call, say, I need to get a GOMOR removed from my file, and we'll look at the file, and it's a one-page response from legal assistance that says, my client falls in his sword. He understands he did all these kind of bad things, and that's not going to get it done in most cases. Now, again, there are some cases where we recommend fall on your sword, but not very often.
Okay, so if just back up, because I think that was a great description of it, Rob. So investigation, putting together, I'm going to call it a packet. Obviously, there's different portions that you've talked about as to what that includes. Talking with the folks that you should be talking to within the chain of command. Okay, and so now you've done all that. So how is an ultimate decision made, and then where does it go from there, Sean?
So,
or is there more? Are there
ultimate
more things
decision goes to the issuing authority for the GOMOR or letter of reprimand. They'll make the final determination of what happens, and they have to review and they have to consider everything that we provide, and everything that we provide is filed with the GOMOR. So the GOMOR rebuttal should be filed with that. And so when I go back and say it's not about winning and losing, it's about not losing, all of our matters showing all the inconsistencies, all the deprivations of procedural due process, things along those lines are going to be included. So now irrationality, their lack of their partiality, their unreasonableness, their unyielding disposition is now filed permanently in that record. So when you go to that board or when you go to that promotion board, that's going to be there. And that's where it's like, all right, we can be successful. We go to the Army Board of Correction military records, the DASEB. All that information is captured at that particular point.
It sounds like that's critical to kind of preserve the record and make sure you get your story out there. And I think, Rob, that's what you've come back to a couple of times in this. And Mick, you should chime in on this too. But it sounds to me like you want as robust of a record as possible, assuming you've got good facts on your side.
Oh, absolutely. And I like what Sean says. It's about not losing, because sometimes what you have to remember is the convening authority, the commanding general, has already kind of halfway made his decision just by issuing the GOMOR, right? Just by drafting it. And so it's difficult to try to convince somebody, especially a GO, that they shouldn't have drafted that thing.
Yeah.
Right. So what Sean's talking about is playing the long game and being ready for that board, saying, hey, here's everything that actually happened. And it's also with DASEB and HRC and everybody else. So then you can make that argument that, hey, the CG is not getting the straight dope, or is just flat out wrong.
I have been surprised, though, in particular these last 2 or 3 years, how often we are successful at the GOMOR stage in getting them locally filed. We've been on a run of late providing that kind of relief to soldiers, and it does at least kind of, I don't know, give you hope that some of these GOs are actually looking at the facts and not just making, quick decisions without considering the soldier's future. We have seen that more often, I think, recently than I can remember before.
Well, it comes down to putting together a really, really good package and finding information. These investigating officers are not professionals. This is an extra duty for them a lot of the times. We're professionals. We know what we're doing. I know what this is supposed to look like. Nothing frustrates me more as somebody who's advised on hundreds, if not 1,000, of these investigations from my time in First Corps and legal assistance through Fifth Group, doing stuff I can't get into because it's very classified. They lack basic elements analysis of, hey, this is what an adultery offense is. All right, well, why is something, it's prejudicial, good, or indiscipline? Because I said so. Well, that's not good enough. That's not what the standard is. And, they ignore that stuff. It's fodder at the board. It's fodder for whatever we want to get to. And something I want to go back to, we will, I'm going to be perfectly honest with the client as well. Sometimes when it's like, hey, you confessed, you're on video, you have all these text messages confessing, there's nothing I can do to fight that. Sometimes you commit misconduct and you're caught red-handed. I remember one of my cases back when I was 3L. There's literally like a blood trail from the car. The guy smashed out a window, and there's a blood trail from his car, from the house, up to his house, to his apartment, bloody handle, and then he opens the door, he has a bloody hand, and said, oh, what happened? Oh, I punched out a window at a bar. And he was mad at me because I couldn't get rid of it. I can't work miracles, but we shift to is this really that bad? Hey, he has post-traumatic stress disorder. Hey, his girlfriend had left him and was cheating on him with the first sergeant, by the way. All this crazy right. Stuff is going on. So we litigate to mitigate at that particular point. And then it's like, well, it should be a local file because this guy just came off a deployment and has found out that, his first sergeant was cheating on with his wife, or, I've actually not really client confidences. Yeah.
There are certainly times where, for lack of a better term, we litigate to mitigate, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a good point. And, core value number one at our firm that we talk about every single week is respect your client. Mm-hmm. And in that core value is you be honest with the client. In this line of work, there's no room for being anything but blunt and straightforward. And that's what you're going to get what you call our office. That's what you're going to get when you have folks like us working your case. We're not going to blow smoke. That's not how we handle business here. Your best shot at getting a good result is confronting the facts against you openly and honestly. Because credibility, as our good friend Jerry Spence says, credibility is king. You lose credibility, you're not going to win at any level, whether it's the GOMOR or the separation board. Matt, what else? Did we cover everything?
I think we're probably...
Mickey's talking too much per usual. I wish he would just not talk so much.
Dan's knocking on the door. Dan's trying to get in here. Our other attorney, he's wondering what we're doing in here. But I think we've probably run the full time on this episode. But I would like to close it with, I guess, one additional item, which is if we could just summarize your recommendation to somebody who receives one of these. What are the 3 or 4 things that they should do and absolutely should not do when they're facing this?
I think the first thing they should do is hire an attorney, whether that's our firm or another firm. Certainly, you're going to want to get a professional opinion or get legal advice. Although, just like Rob said, the legal advice you're going to get from legal assistants is going to be pretty limited because they just don't have the well of experience to draw from in order to advise you appropriately. The second thing is don't make any statements. Don't freak out. You try to keep a level head and understand that no matter what happens, this isn't going to kill you, right? So you just hang in there. The third thing I would say is start getting your documents together that you're going to need to use to either fight the rebuttal or develop your good soldier book. That's very important. It's going to save your attorney a lot of time if you're already thinking that way. A lot of times what people want to do is they want to do an open door with the command right away and try to explain their side.
It's only natural to want to do that, right?
Yes,
especially if you feel like you're in the right.
100%. But the problem is they don't want to meet with you. They're not going to meet with you. And
No.
it annoys them too. So let your attorney handle all of that. We've gotten lots of deals or lots of good results in this stage by having the attorney contact the trial counsel, developing that relationship, understanding what it is that the command really cares about, and trying to work it so our guy can go on and have a very, very good career.
It sounds like the advice is consistent with most of the cases the firm handles, which is 1, don't say anything because that usually makes it worse.
Yeah, keep your mouth shut.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Don't try to solve the issue on your own because then you can end up creating more problems, getting more charges than what you had, and get an experienced attorney involved in it. And look, the experienced attorney might say, there's nothing you can do on this, and the advice could be very simple. But it sounds like in most of these cases, you want an experienced attorney like Sean or Rob or Mickey or Dan or Josh working on your behalf.
It's very entertaining to read Sean's responses if he's attacking the underlying allegation, especially if it's an IO. How he shreds, how he'll shred the IO pretty much to pieces with just basic law. It's an entertaining thing to be a part of, and he's gotten some results over the years that have been mind blowing as far as we're concerned. But yeah, I agree with everything Mickey said.
All right. Well, any last items? I think we're at 47 minutes, so this is one of our longer episodes. But
Matt,
that's all right,
tell you stop us at 35.
It's an important. We never do that. We would.
Our producer is sitting here laughing at us.
Half done.
We're a laughing stock to the podcast.
Well, I
here.
think that what I always think is, they can turn it off, but
the
nobody's
legal
going to do that
because it's a legal disclaimer. It added all that time.
Or my funky question, my terrible question. Well, it was a great episode, guys. We hope it was informative for the audience. Obviously, feel free to reach out to the firm if you're going through this issue, or if you've got questions about what was said on the podcast. We always have our guy who corrects us, right? He sends when we post these.
We haven't heard online. From the concerned. I think his name was. I think his handle name was like the Concerned Air Force Jag or something. But look, we offer free consultations at our firm. So if you're going through something that deals with the GOMOR and you want to just have a chat about your prospects, give us a call. We can't give you legal advice per se, but we can certainly talk to you about some things you need to know.
Yeah, and I think that there's absolutely no reason not to take you up on that. So great episode today, Sean. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure we'll have you back. I think we've got Dan Higgins on tap here at some point.
If he didn't break down the door trying to get in, thinking it was a mistake that he was out.
Driven his car through the place. But great episode. We're signing off for Sean, Mickey, Rob. I'm Matt. We'll see you guys next time.
See you,
Thanks,
man.
and be safe.
Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Military Justice Today podcast with your hosts, Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams. This show was made possible in part by the law firm of Capovilla and Williams. For more information or to listen to more episodes, visit militaryjusticetoday.com.